Marian Newman, welcome to Show Studio.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about Lee McQueen and your working relationship with Lee, and you had an amazing sort of time with him because you did the nails on so many of his different shows and lots of different projects. And tell me, how did you first meet Lee and how did you come to work with him on his shows?
Well, it was a long time ago. It was around 96, 97. And I can't remember the sequence of events, but basically it was working with Nick Knight. That's how I met Lee for the first time. And I don't know which came first, whether it was Nick's amazing cover for Bjork's Homogenic, which was obviously styled by Lee. And some very strange, weird, movable nails that I did. Whether that came first or whether the first show I ever worked on, I'm not sure of how that worked out in that year, but it was all around the same time. And actually we were sort of introduced by Sharon Dowsett, amazing makeup artist, who I'd met again working with Nick, and she was running one team for his show, which was Autumn Winter Couture for Givenchy when he was the designer there in 97. So she had one team and Val Garland had another team, which was strange having two leads in a show like that, but it was such an amazing show, it sort of needed it really. And so that's I either met him with Bjork or I met him at that show. And that was the very, very, very first show I ever did. And
were nails something that were really important to him? Because it was interesting, some of the nails that you brought and the way you were describing them, it seems like the kind of precision of his vision extended right down to the nails, something that he really prioritised.
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously nails are like an accessory to fashion, but for him it wasn't just that. It was creating his creature and it was extending the story of his collection or his design into every tiny little detail. So for example, if you look at the Homogenic cover, you look at Bjork's eyes, she's got those amazing eyes. Every tiny little detail was important to him because it built the story of the person who he was creating. So every time I did anything with him, there was always some story going on with the nails, which was great, and it was unheard of in those days.
So just tell me more about the first Givenchy show you did, because you said that was kind of the first time that there was a real sort of nail team at a show, and the nails were really prioritised in that way.
I'd never heard of a nail team, certainly in Europe. I'm not sure about America, maybe there was some there, but I hadn't heard of anything like that happening in Europe. And actually that's how I met Nick for the first time, is because he needed some nails on a shoot and there was nobody doing it. So he happened by very happy coincidence to have found me, and then I started doing some shoots with Nick and then got introduced to Lee. But no, you couldn't phone up an agency then and get a nail person because we just didn't exist. So and I ended up, do you want to come and do a show in Paris? I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds nice.
That sounds fun.
And then I found out what I had to do. And I thought, oh.
Tell me about that. How did that go? Because that must have been a daunting first show to do.
Yeah, I'd never done a show. I'd never been at a show. I didn't even know really the whole fashion scene as I know it now even existed. It wasn't something that I'd come into contact before. So I got sent a whole load of details about the sort of thing that he wanted. And I remember there were 50 models in the show, all of them huge, amazing models. And again, okay, I'll go and do some nails. But then as sort of the time progressed, I was getting information from the Givenchy office about what he wanted.
Was it getting more and more complicated?
Yes. And then I started to panic a little bit because I heard he wanted spiral nails. I was like, okay, spiral nails. Well, is it this spiral? Is it this spiral? Is it that? What spiral nails? So whoever it was in the Paris office got him to actually sketch what he meant. Unfortunately, it was only on one model who was wearing a very specific dress, and he sketched the hand showing the spiral that he wanted. And the spiral that he wanted went round like that, so it curled round underneath the hand.
And did you have to do it on all of her fingers?
Yeah, so 10 fingers, but thank goodness, only one model. Can you imagine having to do that for 50 models? I had to work out how to make it first in a couple of days. So I worked out how to do it at home, and I made 3 or 4. to make sure that it was right. And then I went out to Paris for a couple of days before, actually. We had a few days of tests. So when I showed him the few that I'd made, and he was like, yes, that's it. So then I had to make the other 6.
Terrifying.
Yeah, which I did in my hotel room.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was so glamorous. Yeah, in my hotel room with an electric drill, because I used liquid powder, acrylic, built it up with acrylic, and then with an electric drill, like filed it so it was reasonably smooth. But I remember the person who was there with me helping, liquid and powder is literally a white powder and a liquid, and we had white powder in the bathroom and she dropped the whole thing all over the bathroom.
Oh no.
So I don't know what the hotel thought.
Yeah, they probably thought you were having a different
what we were doing.
different kind of work going on. But it's interesting you said, I think the notion of the fact that every model had a different nail look is really interesting, because I think people would imagine that for a show, which is the case with some shows, everyone has kind of like a red nail or something. But was he, I guess that's an extension of this notion of him building a character, but that must have been so complicated to work on.
It was complicated. I'm sort of used to it now. I expect it now. But then I'd never worked on a show. I didn't know how backstage worked on a show. And I had 50 models, and there were a few that had nothing, that had bare nails, but all the rest had very specific. He knew exactly what he wanted.
Was he always that specific, or later on would he come to you for ideas, or was he very much kind of, he knew what he wanted?
He did more or less know what he wanted. I mean, sometimes he didn't know it down to the last detail, so he'd know he'd want something a bit weird or just a specific colour, and then maybe it would be up to me to say, okay, how about this? And that obviously worked quite well. But yeah, I do. There are very, very, very few shows that I've actually kept anything from, because I wouldn't have anywhere to live in my house if I kept them all. But funnily enough, that was my first ever show, so I did keep a load of stuff for that. I just sort of put it away and realised it was there. But I've got the original notes that were faxed to me from Paris, and then the notes that I made when I was actually there, and it's got each model, and in some instances it's got like a tiny little piece of the fabric so I could match the colour exactly, and so yeah, each one has got their own little notes. So specific.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just had to get them all done.
It's interesting because people often talk about how his vision of beauty, there was kind of darkness in beauty and things that would perhaps traditionally be seen as kind of ugly or jarring or shocking, how he would make them beautiful. And it seems like that extended to he didn't just want them to be sort of something glamorous and traditionally sort of, beautiful in an expected way. He quite liked things that were a bit vicious or a bit...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, those spiral nails. And then there were quite a few others in that show. I haven't got any pictures of it because, in those days, you didn't take a camera anywhere. It just wasn't done. So I haven't got any pictures of those nails. The only thing I've got is a screenshot from the video of the show that's on YouTube. But I do remember that some of the nails he wanted quite vicious, quite sort of Chinese-y type weapons.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he wanted some, maybe it was Japanese symbols that were put on there to look like a sort of a Chinese or Japanese weapon. Actually,
it's incredible.
It's all a lot of it is all very dark and like strange. But they always had a story. There was always a story behind it. It wasn't random.
And would he make you fully aware of that story, or do you think it was something that was going on in his head and he'd kind of brief you, or would he come to you and kind of describe his character and describe his creature? How would it work?
Well, I think in those early days, I didn't have too much interaction with him. I got the notes and I got the sketch, and I didn't have too much interaction with him as a person. A bit later on, I did, because I do, like smaller things, a shoot or something. So, there's not so many people there. But then I did do quite a few, I didn't do all his shows by any means, but then I did do quite a few shows later on where I'd get a brief, but I did a few shows that weren't quite so involved and complicated. Nevertheless, they were quite spectacular, amazing shows that I'm so grateful I experienced.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of high moments, like top moments with working on him? Because it's interesting you mentioned the shoots as well, because you did kind of lots of interesting projects with him.
Lots of interesting projects, yeah. Well, for example, I worked on the shoot for Show Studio with Nick called Transformer. That was many, many days of lots of people, all about transforming from one thing into another. And Lee was there for one day, and he did he did a transformer, and he transformed from himself into an eagle, which was quite spectacular to watch, standing right at the back of the set, watching him just, you know, with clever photography, change into an eagle. And then he did the other one where he changed a bridegroom into a bride, which is quite spectacular. And again, you know, standing on the side, just watching that happen in front of your eyes was quite amazing. But one of the shows that I did actually watch, I don't watch too many shows, but one of the shows of his that I did actually watch because I knew how spectacular it was going to be was the one where there was the virtual Kate Moss in the upside down pyramid. And that, I think that brought everybody to tears in the audience, because you couldn't work out I knew what it was because I'd worked on the film, but nobody knew what was going on inside this pyramid. And then the realization that happened all around when it was like, oh, it's a person, oh, it's a person in a dress, it's Kate Moss, and everybody, you know, when they realized it was this huge, and the people were clapping and crying, and that was quite spectacular.
It's interesting because it's interesting that you say you went and watched that one, because you must have had a very different view of his shows being backstage at them, because people talk about them and it's all about the spectacle and the runway, but actually, and it is interesting also that you mentioned Transformer, because when he is turning the bridegroom into the bride, he's so sort of vicious in his actions. And was it quite like that backstage? Was there a lot of energy? Was there a lot of drama, I guess?
Yeah. Yes, there was. I think, you know, for somebody of his incredible level of genius, creativity, to have worked all that time on a collection, on a creation, for it actually to come to fruition, and you've almost sort of handed it over to a whole load of other people to visualize it for you, to then make it happen. And I think that is where a huge amount of that energy must lie. You know, you've worked so long on this, you've had such a vision, and now it's over to this massive team of people
to make it happen,
to pull it all together and make it happen. And I mean, it's the same with any show, but I do remember quite a few of his shows in particular being really just so intense, because everything had to be beyond perfect, beyond exactly what he wanted. And I hope he always got what he wanted. I might have seen a few, you know, but I don't think I ever saw any, you know, that's wrong, that's shocking, that's, you know, it all seemed to work from my point of view.
And it must be strange for you kind of hearing people talk about the shows and talk about being at them, because you obviously have such a different perspective, and people, you know, people love Lee's shows and they talk about them constantly, and they kind of do what you described when sort of discussing the hologram. They say, oh, do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when that happened? And it's an odd view because you're so involved, but you kind of miss a bit of that as well. Not seeing them from that side.
Well, yes, I do, because quite often, you know, if I've got complicated nails, I don't move from that lineup, because, you know, imagine you've got, like, for example, you know, a great big spiral nail thing, and there's one missing, you know. So I don't move from them, but the ones that I did watch, I honestly can't remember what the nails were, which suggests to me that they were probably quite simple, might be specific colours or something, so they were probably quite simple, and the fact that I could escape and go out and watch the show would suggest even more that they were quite simple.
And did it give you a different perspective when you did actually go and watch the shows?
Oh, totally. Because, I mean, this job, I'm sure you realise as well, this job, whether it's a shoot, whether it's a show, whatever it is, the result is glamorous. You know, we work in the centre of the whole glamorous industry, but the process is so not glamorous. It's only the result. So working backstage, scrabbling around on dirty floors with models' dirty feet, and you know, getting bashed in the head by the hairdresser trying to do the hair
at the same time.
It's just so not glamorous. And it's only the result that you realise actually it really is. But so going to watch a show, that is seeing the result. It's like, okay.
And it all makes sense.
Now it all makes sense, and
that's
I get it.
Yeah. Tell me a bit more about working on some of the images, because I think that's also a side that, you know, the imagery, particularly the imagery that Nick produced with Lee McQueen, has become so iconic. And you really worked on some of that. You were telling me about the snakes image with Racquel, which has obviously formed part of Plato's Atlantis, that film. Tell me about working on that.
Well, that is one of those, and I've worked on so many shoots, and some really, really stand out, you know, as like a massive memory. And that was definitely one of them. It was working on the film that was projected during Plato's Atlantis.
Which was his final collection.
Which was his final show, yeah. Which was quite amazing. And that was filmed in a studio with Racquel Zimmerman, one of the most gorgeous models, one of my most favourite actually to work with, in a sandbox with a lot of snakes. And when I say a lot of snakes...
Going back to that thing about glamour.
Exactly, in a sandbox with snakes. How glamorous is that? The result is spectacular, but seeing Racquel in that sandbox with snakes all over her, and they really were snakes all over her. There were snakes, you know, from like this long and this round to snakes that were that big, but all of them in there at the same time. And so that was the film, and then that was also the visual for the whole campaign, you know, for the whole collection. But I do remember that apart from the spectacle of those snakes and what they were doing, and how Racquel, who's such a trooper, how she coped with them. One really lovely memory of that is that these funny little snakes, they all seem to congregate up behind Racquel's head and sort of like to burrow their way into, because she had quite big hair for that, burrow their way into her hair for some reason. And I remember at one bit, all these snakes had all like disappeared into her hair, and there was a loud noise from somewhere or another, and all these little snakes all of a sudden went like that. He was standing watching, Lee was just literally by the sandbox watching. He loved that so much. He was literally jumping up and down going, yes. He was just so happy that he got exactly what he wanted from that whole image. He was so excited by it.
Was he quite like that, you know, when everything came together, could you really feel the emotion and the passion he had for it?
Absolutely. You could tell when it was exactly how he wanted it to be, because he'd just be so excited. Yeah. And yet when things were coming together, there was one shoot, I can't remember which one it was. It might have been another one of Nick. Maybe it was L'Afrique C'est Chic. It might have been that one, where he was still working on the outfits, and he was literally over in the corner of the studio all on his own, sitting cross-legged on a stool sewing, because, you know, he needed to finish it off, and it was, you know.
And he'd always push himself to the limit, wouldn't he? In terms of, like, it was interesting what you were saying about how someone close to him said to you that he'd always push for a more exuberant nail. Tell me about that. Was he always kind of really...
Well, I think, he just liked to push things, and as you said earlier, you know, his vision of beauty wasn't always everybody's vision of beauty, because it could be quite savage. But there was at one point, quite a few years ago, I mean, I can't remember when, many years ago, I can't remember exactly what year, but say, if I did that first show in '97, it was probably like the early 2000s, around then, that somebody that was quite close to him, who I saw, said to me, please don't let him know you're available, he'll want a nail. I'm like, well, I'd quite like to do a nail actually, but...
I guess it is one of those ones where once you start working with someone like that who kind of lets the nails become part of the narrative, it's just such an amazing experience. And that particularly was the case with Plato's Atlantis, wasn't it? They became such a part of the story. Tell me about doing the nails. And it's interesting because you kept them as well.
I did keep them, which was, again, it was quite strange that I kept them. I'm so glad I did, obviously. He did actually tell me the story for that. I went to his studio, and he had all the references there, and he did tell me this story about how this collection, you know, whereas life as we know it has evolved from the oceans out onto the land, his vision for this collection was in the reverse. So his creatures that he was creating, they start off on the land, and then they actually evolve back into the sea, which was quite an interesting concept. And I must admit, I didn't get it for quite a while, because I don't really know what this means in the scheme of things, and nails specifically. And also he wanted dimensions to change, because if you remember the makeup, and everything, the dimensions were wrong. They were changed. They were real creatures, and so that's what he explained to me. And so I went away and made all sorts of ideas of changing dimensions. and took pictures and sent to him. And he did sort of like them all, but it needed something more as well. And so fortunately, I was sponsored by a company called Minx that can manufacture amazing things that you then put onto nails. So we got prints of the PDFs of the fabric that he was using that had this whole journey from the earth back into the ocean. And we took little details of the print and then printed that onto the nails. I did make some where I altered the dimensions of the nail and altered the structure of the nail. We made quite a few of those, but unless you've actually got the real hand there, it's really hard to do. So although we made some, we made them just in case. But actually the detail of the fabric that we'd prepared, and we made 1,000 nails for that show. So him and his stylist, Camilla Nicholson, had the range that they could choose from. He'd also told me during his storytelling, because this was quite a story that he explained, that he wanted, as the show progressed, so the Earth people, he wanted their nails to be relatively short. He wanted them all to be square. That was, it was all very specific.
Very specific.
But the Earth people, he wanted the nails to be short, but then as they progressed, from the earth into the air, because they were like moths and all sorts of things like that. So they went from the earth into the air and into the ocean. He wanted the nails to start getting longer and longer and longer until the ocean people had the longest of all. And that was all part of this evolutionary tale that he had in his head. I mean, what an incredible vision that was.
I know, for it to extend down to everything, down to the makeup and the nails, and such a kind of specific.
So specific.
Why do you think you did keep them?
Well, I think they're very, very beautiful. I mean, the ones that I've got left, they're not the ones that actually went on the models. They're the ones we had left over, and they're quite a few years old now, so they're a little bit trashed because they've just been banging around in a plastic bag in a cupboard at home. I just think because they were so beautiful, and I don't think there has been anything like it before or since for nails, because the detail and you can see the creatures, they've all got names, like there's green moth or there's jellyfish, or they've all got sort of strange names. They're just so incredible, and I just don't think we worked so hard on making them, and having the 1,000 that we laid all out on a big black cloth so he could see the whole range at once. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. That was then, but I'm so glad now that I didn't throw them away.
Is that kind of your lasting sort of takeaway from working with him? It must be the way he, and a lot of people who collaborated with him say this, the way he always pushed you to kind of do as much as you could and not better yourself, but sort of push your own skills and creativity to the limit.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, I mean, I didn't know him personally. He wasn't a friend or anything. He was somebody that I worked with on various projects. But in the time that I did spend with him, which is relatively minimal, he was so nice about it. You could tell if you'd got it right or if you hadn't got it right just by his face. You could show him something and it'd just be it wouldn't be that's rubbish. It would just be I'm sure other people a bit closer might have had a different experience with the drama and that genius trying to come out, but he was always really nice, and when it was right, his face just showed it all. It was like, yes, that's it. So, it was very rewarding and just an amazing genius to work with, I think. But yeah, that last show was something. I was at the front of the lineup. He was at the very front, and he actually gave the models a fabulous little rousing talk.
Really?
Before
what did he say?
That. Most of the designers do that before the models actually walk out. I mean, it might just be a quick, look straight ahead, don't smile.
Lots of energy.
Lots of energy, nice and strong. But he gave them a little talk, and I mean, I can't remember it word for word, obviously it was a long time ago, but I did remember him saying, you're all like a gang, you all belong to the same group of people, and you must all help each other, and you must walk really strong, really powerful. And if you remember, they had those shoes.
Oh my gosh.
If any of you fall over, the next one help her up, because you're all there to help each other, and it doesn't matter if that happens because you're all part of the same tribe. And
that's nice.
Yeah, and it was he really did, you could see them all. They'd been standing there for ages in their shoes and their amazing hair and playing with their nails. I was going along saying, stop it, because they're all don't touch them, press them on, don't pick them.
Don't pick them.
But I was there, in case any of them lost them. But you could see, they were all like, and then he gave that little talk, and they all just
they transformed.
They transformed into those creatures that you see walking out on that amazing stage with the robots and the snakes on the background.
It's interesting that he has that kind of ability to bring something out of people that they didn't know they had.
Yeah, they were the tribe. They were his tribe and his creatures, and they were an evolution of it. And that's who they were when they walked out there. It was amazing, actually. And I could watch it on the same monitor that he was, because I was standing there making sure they weren't picking their nails off.
Doesn't give you much time to reflect on the show.
No, I'm too busy watching. But yeah, I've watched it several times since, because it's just amazing, isn't it? Amazing to watch.
Marian, thank you so much.
Thank you.